Well, hello, everyone. It's the Second Act Show yet again. I'm John Tarnoff.
I'm Carrie Hannon.
And today, Carrie, who are we today?
Today, we are the Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris of Second Acts.
Very distinguished pair.
I won't sing, I promise.
So today we have a great session set up for you guys with our friend Tim Driver from the AgeFriendly Institute, who has been an early adopter and promoter of Second Act careers. And unless you have a announcement, Carrie, how's your book doing?
Oh, it's doing great. Everyone check it out. In Control at 50 Plus. It's been a lot of fun and I love talking about it. So here we go. But great. Tim knows a lot about this.
Good. Well, let us bring on our friend Tim Driver. There is Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Wonderful to see you.
Hey, great to have you on the show with us today. You have been in this arena for quite some time, making a huge difference. And John and I are delighted to have you here.
Well, it's a pleasure. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you.
So I'm just going to do a quick little intro on Tim so that everyone understands a little bit more about who he is and where he comes from. So long before Tim earned his MBA from Georgetown, he was an entrepreneur. And I'm told that his earliest business ventures included a hamburger stand, an ice cream truck, and selling Boston Globes out of a boat in Boston Harbor. So he's going to let us know whether this is true. But he is well known as one of the earliest adopters, as we were saying, in the Second Act career space, as the founder of AgeFriendly Ventures, which dates back to 2006, and was instrumental now in coming up with retirement jobs and mature caregivers. Previously, he worked at salary.com and at AOL, where he was also involved in career and job-related ventures. He's been interviewed all over Wall Street Journal, NBC, NPR, CNN, et cetera. Proud Boston resident and I believe a Red Sox fan. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
Good. Very good. So we got
Go
that
Sox.
out of the way. Very good.
Well, so glad you're here, as I said, Tim. And I'm just so glad that you're here. And I actually have been one of those people who has interviewed you over the years, and you're in my new book. And I just hats off to you. But what I was hoping you could just kick off the show today by give us a sense of what the ethos is in the age-friendly environment for employers, for job seekers. What are you seeing? What are some of the shifts that are going on in recent years and that you've been witnessed and been a big part of?
Well, there's progress to report, and I'm happy to say that there's progress. When we started out in 2006 on retirementjobs.com, asking people, job seekers, whether they felt that age bias was a fact of life in the workplace, 9 out of 10 people said yes, they'd seen it, they'd experienced it, or they knew friends who dealt with it. And here, 15 years later, we still ask those questions in a longitudinal sort of way, so we can sort of compare today to the past. And the good news is it's now 8 and 10, but that's a terrible report. And so there's a lot of work to be done. But I will say, what's going on is there's a general cultural shift, I think, taking place out there where, when I first started looking at this topic, if a line manager was thinking about hiring someone over the age of 50, that was a pretty risky thing to do. If you were, let's say you were 35 years old and you were, lining up some candidates and one of them was, 60, it was sort of risky to make that move, make that offer, risky to your own job. And nowadays, that's really not the case. It's much more accepted generally there to be some gray hair in the workplace, and so that's a welcome change. But there's lots more to be done.
Tim, you just had a conference that you organized in Boston called Revolutionize, and how did that come about? What was the purpose of the conference, and can you share some of the takeaways?
Well, the purpose of the conference really is to get stakeholders who are working on making the overall experience for older adults better, just to bring those stakeholders together across different sort of silos or verticals in the so-called aging space. So it's people who are thinking about workforce, but also people who are thinking about age-friendly places to live and age-friendly places to get care, for example. So it's putting all those people in the same room, getting them to meet each other where they wouldn't ordinarily cross paths most of the time. But I think what makes it even more interesting is in this area of aging, shall we call it, there's a really good opportunity to bring together people from the nonprofit world, the policy world, and the private sector world, because there's a lot of mobilization going on across all of those different silos, if you will, but these people are not meeting each other. So one of the sort of theses of the conference and sort of the Age-Friendly Institute's work is to bring those stakeholders together, get them to sort of learn from each other, and then draw in policy. And one of the highlights of that conference was the governor of the state of Massachusetts, who came back for a second time and, really made a fine point of the fact that, first of all, he was announcing that Massachusetts is the first state in the country to become designated as a certified age-friendly employer. But he made a big point about, if he's going to recommend this act for other employers in the state, which he does almost every day, unscripted, he needed to lead by example. And he sort of told that story. And also it's interesting in state government, and I think this is probably the case well beyond Massachusetts, probably across the country, the percentage of people who are over the age of 50 is way higher than the average. So that was one of the highlights of the conference.
Right. Well, that age bubble is certainly well documented and continuing to grow. And what is it? 25% of the workforce is going to be over 55 or 60 by 2030. I mean, this is a growing segment of the population, and I think we're seeing, and what you're demonstrating is that there are going to have to be adjustments in the workforce to accommodate this older population.
What I like, Tim, also is what you mentioned, the synergy of getting the public, the private sectors, all nonprofit, all together to come up with some solutions. Because one of the stumbling blocks that I have seen from both the employer and the employee perspective or job seeker is in this area of skills and retraining and upskilling. And a lot of that can come from a public initiative, can't it? I mean, there's something that if employers, the private sector would speak to, get these programs in motion, we might find a better way to make this work. I mean, is there something there that you're seeing happening?
Absolutely. I mean, and there are, I would say, at least in the states where I've studied this most closely, there are increased investments going on into, upskilling people who are, in the older part of their careers. I think where the policy people can make the biggest difference is simply by their convening power and bringing these employers together and sort of recognizing them prominently so that the business case is better known. I think, I talked to lots of employers at a very senior level. Probably last year I spoke to 250 employers in the sort of chief people officer type role. And what they were after was a combination of things. And this is what's, I think, pretty exciting if you're a job seeker or an employee over 50 today. The value proposition has just grown. DEI is bigger today than it's ever been, and age is most of the time included in that definition. In addition to that, I see, John, you're.
I'll come back to that. Back to that.
So DEI is a big one. Retention is a huge one. I mean, we're in a cycle right now where retaining people is more important than ever, because if you're an employer and you're having a tough time finding people, which they are obviously, another way to tackle this is to just do a better job of keeping people. And by being more explicit about the organizational commitment to this workforce, it goes a long way. And I'm really struck by the level at which the commitment to being age-friendly is being made. So, we charge a very nominal application fee. So there's no price, obstacle to getting certified. But because it's so much a part of the employer brand and the workforce culture and the workforce strategy, it's not unusual for the C-suite and even the CEO to be signing off on this before it gets done. And that's music to my ears.
And I know, John, you have a question, but quickly, can you tell us what makes an employer eligible for the CAFE certification? What is it you're looking for there?
Sure. So I guess I'll start by sort of calling it age neutrality. We're not looking for, sort of extra advantages to be made available to the older worker. We're looking for there to be a level playing field. And that's where we start. And the whole program is rooted in compensation and benefits and HR standards. So my background prior to doing this was in media companies, but also in HR and HR tech, and a compensation and benefits firm that I was at prior to this. And we got started here by creating the Certified Age-Friendly Employer Program around some standards that you would apply in HR. And we sort of thought, what would Consumer Reports do if they were looking to identify these welcoming employers? And then we needed a name for it, so we came up with this term age-friendly. And, it's been developing ever since. And I would say today it's developing at least 5 times faster than it was in 2006. That's a good signal of kind of where things are going, not just in this country, by the way, but internationally as well.
So how many companies now are signed up to the certification?
Well, on retirementjobs.com, there are many, many hundreds of employers. But of the group that's gotten certified is about 150. And then there's several hundred that are in the queue as we sit here today being processed. And so
right.
That sort of speaks to the volume. I think
right.
We have sort of focused on larger employers because those are the ones that have been quickest to come back to us with a comprehensive answer and a satisfactory answer to being certified, because they already have DEI programs in place that oftentimes really lay the groundwork for this. I would say, and I say this to job seekers a lot, anecdotally, we see age discrimination to be less acute in smaller businesses. And I think that that's where I really want the program to go even faster in the future, is into medium-sized and smaller businesses.
Right.
What criteria do you look for, though, in the employer? Do they have to show you that they have a workforce that is X percent over 50 or something like that?
Well, we ask every employer as part of the process, specifically, what is the percentage of people in your workforce over the age of 50? There's no quota there, but we're sort of collecting data. And in some part, we're doing that so that we can reflect back to them in their industry, how do they compare to their peers? And so we're helping them get better. We recertify every 2 years. So when they go through it the first time, we set a baseline, and then we're looking for progress against that baseline when it comes to recertification time.
And is the progress based on the numbers of over 50 employees? As a percentage of the overall workforce?
That's one of them. And then, there's a whole, battery of things that we ask questions on. I would say about half of them are, quantifiable, so we can easily measure them 2 years down the road. And the other half are more qualitative, and they have to do with, what is the level of buy-in from the C-suite on this topic? And, one thing that I look for all the time now, and our team of certifiers looks for, is something that's bubbled up in the last just probably 2 or 3 years, is the concept of ERGs around older adults. So what's an ERG? Well, ERGs, or employee resource groups, have been around for a while. They started with, LGBTQ and women in technology and gender and things of that nature. In the last few years, many, many companies have started employee resource groups around the older adult workforce.
Interesting. So I want to take that as a cue to circle back to my question about DEI, because when I put my course together for LinkedIn on managing across generations, the stat that I came up with around DEI was that DEI only about 10% of DEI programs. It was 8 to 10% of DEI programs. This is 2 years ago, included age as a factor in diversity. So are you seeing that is significantly increased, or are you kind of talking to the companies in that 8 to 10%, or what's going on?
Gosh, that's a great question. I mean, I haven't looked at this, I haven't sampled it that way. I guess we're talking to the ones that are in that you're referring to.
Right.
And I think the way the conversation goes is, folks apply to the program because they want to develop a comprehensive program. So DEI staffs are probably 4 or 5 times bigger and better funded than they were 3 or 4 years ago. So if that's the case, then it's natural that they want to now make their programs comprehensive. And if they're going to make them comprehensive, then they would absolutely add age. So what typically happens is the C-suite chief people officer learns about this program somewhere, and they say, let's go check that out. And then once they understand, the integrity of it, how long it's been around, and the fact that maybe their competitors have already done it, they then want to get involved. But I don't really have a great answer for your point there. I'm sure that's true. A couple of years ago, 8 or 10%, but I'll be actually interested to study that further and see. It's definitely growing, and I think growing quickly.
Hopefully, yes.
So Tim, to get into some of the nuts and bolts for someone who is looking to maybe start a second act in the over 50 or whatever it might be, what is the challenge that a job seeker in this age cohort faces? I mean, some of them, is it changing, but what are the core things? And then on the flip side, what are employees' concerns and what makes it harder for them to just welcome them with open arms?
Well, I would start by saying employers' attitudes are changing. COVID made a difference here. So the biggest difference that COVID made, I think, was the following. For many years, for as long as we've been doing this work, older workers, so to speak, have been saying they'd love to work flexibly or remotely. And that hasn't been really that attractive to employers. But that all changed during COVID. And the idea, it's no longer sort of a productivity killer to have people working remotely. That's well proven now. So that's a good thing because, a job seeker might decide now, retirement or semi-retirement looks like, well, the employer is going to still value me if I'm working mornings remotely. I'm not going to be treated as a pariah, sort of the older guy or older woman. Then I'm more into that now. So now if I'm going to be treated well and treated with respect, oftentimes things come down to that important word of respect. What our survey work shows that people are talking about 7 out of 10 are saying they're willing to delay their retirement up to 5 years because of that change alone. So I think that's a really big headline out of COVID, and I think it contributes to this idea of the great, resignation or the great, what I would say, reconsideration. So what else can they do, or how do they navigate around the challenges? The good news is the cafe employers are in almost every sector now. So it used to be that they were centered around certain sectors. Now it's pretty mainstream, even in, John, I know you're very familiar with this category of the sort of the creative industries. That's where age bias, I think, was the most acute, and maybe still is today.
I agree. I think it still is.
But I do think there's some change going on there, and I know that in Hollywood, for example, it's tough. You get older, and it's being in the acting world, it's tough when you get older.
Well, and it's not just in front of the camera, USC has done a number of studies about this and on the age question, other diversity questions. But yeah, behind the camera, I think as much or more than in front of the camera, because it's perceived to be such a youth-focused market, which is also untrue.
Right.
But are there any particular industries or jobs that jump out at you from what the data you guys see there that really are more receptive to older workers?
Well, I will start by one last point on this past point, which is, Publicis Group is a large, organization that's in the, advertising and marketing world for big clients. And they recently became a certified age-friendly employer because this was an important cultural shift for them. So they were identifying the fact that they needed to make that shift themselves, but they also wanted to communicate that shift really important for their clients. So, but, back to the conference, they brought some clients, and showed some videos of work that they had done on behalf of those clients that sort of showed this shift going on, and the shift that some big American brands want to make and send messages around to, consumers at large of any age.
Is this in terms of how their customer facing activities, or internal, or both?
Absolutely both. Absolutely both. And I think, so they were showing an ad that they developed and ran for Folgers that was on this topic. Another company, Nestle Health, recently went through the process, and they very much said, well, if we're going to be marketing on behalf of the other consumer, we absolutely need to walk the talk, become certified ourselves, or see if we can become certified. It turned out that they could be. So those are really, really good signs in some of those industries that wouldn't have been doing that kind of thing 5 years ago. Carrie, to your question, the areas, the job categories where I would say we've seen the biggest uptake for older workers is in healthcare. And it's always been the case that, for example, the benefits in that space have always been some of the best benefits, and those, if they apply across the board and include older adults, that's a good thing. But one of the things that we see, for example, let's just take the home care industry. In that industry, we find is that if there's an older caregiver, let's just say someone in their 50s and 60s, taking care of someone in their 80s and 90s, those two people develop a better rapport because they just have more in common. And, we sometimes joke that they both know that Paul Newman was an actor and not a maker of salad dressing. So they just have more in common. And if that's the case, that they have more in common, they form a stronger bond. The engagement lasts longer. And if all those things are true, then the family, who's the customer, is a happier customer. And customer satisfaction, obviously, is the goal for any business. So that's probably the most profound sector of all of the sectors that we've seen. It's not for everybody, but it's a great job for a lot of people.
I want to ask a question that kind of pivots off that example that you made in terms of the age-friendly certified companies. Fantastic that leadership recognizes this as an opportunity and wants to pursue it. What are the challenges that companies are experiencing internally to handle internal age bias that may have been unrecognized prior to the company becoming certified, but now it's becoming an issue? Does AgeFriendly Institute have protocols and suggestions to help companies create more internally age-friendly environments and dispel age bias internally where it might have been unchecked?
Well, I love the question, and I think the short answer is yes, and we do some training, and we're going to be doing more training to this point, so that when recertification comes around, there's not just a little bit of progress, but there's real progress. We want to get meaningful advancing of the ball here, not just little tweaks. So I think training is really important, because it's one thing for a company to get certified as an age-friendly employer. It's another thing for that message to get communicated throughout the organization. We've always had a policy where if we get feedback, and we often do, from people that say, well, gosh, that employer is certified as age-friendly, but my father had this experience. We always ask those employers to go investigate, and it's sort of an honor system. But we hear back stories, really positive stories all the time, about how things were, remedied and resolved. I will say that the most important thing that we want to see in certification is legitimate, authentic buy-in from the C-suite, because it goes without saying that if the CEO is making a message, which is pretty easy to do, that there is and should be and will be, people will be held accountable around this commitment to an organizational commitment to age diversity or age friendliness, it starts to, have a bigger impact or a faster impact, I would say. So that's probably the most important thing in the sort of cultural shift within organizations. And then, ultimately this does bleed into the rest of American culture, which is kind of what needs to happen, frankly.
We could not agree more.
So tell us about where you're headed. What are some of the big challenges for you personally? What excites you about the work you're doing, and what direction should we be watching for?
Well, I love the work. I got into the work, as you referenced in the setup. I worked at AOL in the early days of the internet and ran a group of channels, one of which was the careers channel, and got to know Monster, which at the time was the leading career site, very, very well. And I always thought, given the population trends, there should be a job site for people over the age of 50, given the population trends. And so it began as a business idea. And then a few years later, I had left AOL and I was with another firm called salary.com. My dad got let go very abruptly. And he was with a bank that he'd been with for many years and had been a loyal, contributor to. And all of a sudden, the game changed, and he was replaced by someone much younger. And it's not that companies shouldn't be allowed to make changes. That's their prerogative. But the way in which it was handled was really just inappropriate. It could have been done a lot better. So it became a personal passion in addition to a business idea at that point. And that's when I, recruited some people from AOL and Monster and salary.com and a host of other players and got started on creating what is now the leading career site for people over 50. And the very first employee was the person who I worked with closely to create the Certified Age-Friendly Employer program. And I think that to this day, that's the program that is probably, developing the most momentum around this topic, at least within the Age-Friendly Institute's sphere. And what we're really also just excited by is the level of, engagement by employers, but also by other organizations around the topic of aging. So Governor Baker is a great example, but also in other countries. So we're going to be making some announcements later this year about the first few countries that are going to be affiliates of the Certified Age-Friendly Employer program. So we'll continue to do the certifications themselves centrally out of our headquarters in Boston, but it's now becoming a worldwide program. And I think that that's very, very exciting and something I'm really proud of.
So is it possible we're actually going to get age-friendly countries?
Great question. Well, it's interesting. There's age-friendly employers. The World Health Organization very capably has developed a 1,000 city-strong age-friendly communities initiative. And then an organization called the Institute for Healthcare Improvement has developed something called age-friendly health systems. And those sort of make up what we refer to as the age-friendly ecosystem. And to your point, John, there are now, run by the World Health Organization, initiatives to develop age-friendly countries. And so that's, I guess, where you have a compilation of cities, and it gets bigger and bigger from there.
Well, I think it may get into another whole conversation, but I think the waterfall that I'm hearing you talk about is a system that is based on care, starts with care and an awareness that the global age bubble will require more resources than ever before to address the issue of the age bubble and the ballooning number of older people in the population generally. And does that have this economic consequence into the workforce? And is that a model for us to use kind of on a narrative level to promote more appreciation for and interest in and hiring of older workers?
Without a doubt, there's just a incredibly fast-growing need for care, and it shows up in lots of different forms. I mean, there are a lot of companies that are dealing with the fact that their employees are losing time and productivity to the fact that they have to take care of their older loved ones, and that's a whole body of work. And there's a lot of good work going on around that, but there needs to be a lot more. And then the workforce around healthcare and people working longer is an extraordinarily big challenge to take on. And I think there's a lot of shifts going on. Technology. You look at the impact of technology. I think the cashier job is going to go away, and I think there's going to be a lot of cashiers turning into caregivers, and I think that's probably not a bad evolution.
Interesting.
So if you look at sort of workforce at large, where technology supplants one area, one thing that's interesting about caregiving is, as much as people are trying to automate it and are making inroads there, you can't really fully automate care. It's just not
right. The robots aren't going to make it.
It's not possible to do it. You can't get to the final piece of it all robotically.
Yeah. I'm putting up this stat. We were looking at this before, but to the point that you were just making about the evolution of jobs, this is a stat that was in Bloomberg article someone shared with me earlier. But I think it's interesting if you look at this. It's showing the increase in workforce participation across demographics. And basically the bottom line message is that people over 75 are going to substantially increase their participation in the workforce over the near term, have been and will continue to be. So I think that's another factor that we're going to be dealing with, is that everyone's going to be working.
It's good for the economy. And as we were saying earlier, Tim, maybe good for mental and physical health as well, correct?
Absolutely. I think, it's really interesting. That's a very important point, is that I think that the labor force participation rates going up among older workers is a really good thing. I think, if you look at the trend, you go back to when Social Security started, and that was when the trend started to go down. People started retiring earlier, and it sort of bottomed out in the 80s and early 90s. And ever since that time, it's been steadily growing, the labor force participation rate for older workers. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's contributing to people's health, both physically and mentally. We did some work for Wharton a couple of years ago and wrote a chapter for a book that they released around the level of engagement that you have when you're working is about 4 times that of when you're not working. And so engagement, people talk a lot about sort of isolation of older adults, and that's a real problem. And it can be addressed in some ways by people staying engaged through either volunteering or through working. And so if you're staying involved, staying engaged longer, I think that's, and it's not, I just think this, it's proven that it's helpful to people's health, their economic security, and Carrie, as you very rightly pointed out, to the economy. The GDP is impacted by a labor force participation rate going up.
Yep. Well, good. Well, I think that's just a very positive note to end on.
Indeed. I think this is great. So hang on, Tim. I just want to show the upcoming show that we're going to be doing in a couple of weeks on August 4th. Justin Smith from Savant Wealth Management is going to be talking about this question of continuing to work while continuing to save, and how the financial services industry is starting to adjust to this increase in labor workforce participation. And then following that, we're going to have a fascinating conversation with Mona Morshid from generation.org. And then our friend Andy Levine of Second Act's podcast, who has some amazing stories of people who keep working. So stay tuned for that. Join us for that. And for today, thank you, Tim Driver, for being a guest on our show. It was great to have you.
Thank you, John and Carrie, so much. It's really been a privilege, and I've enjoyed the experience.
Well, keep
Great.
up the good work. We love it.
We'll keep talking.
All right, you too.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so
Bye.
much.